pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This is the meeting of the Morrison County Board of Adjustment. The board is made up of citizens from the 5 commissioner districts of the county. The purpose of this board is to review the applications of land property owners for relief from the strictest interpretation of the county ordinances. Our guidelines are established in state statutes, chapter 394.27, subsection 7. The decision made by this board is the result of whether or not a practical difficulty has been determined. If the board determines there is a practical difficulty, we then review the guidelines in the form of 6 criteria questions that are answered at the end of the applicant's request. A final decision is then made. Each request is evaluated on its own unique practical difficulty. Variances are granted to the land, not to the landowner. This board may, in addition, impose conditions in the granting of variances to ensure compliance. After your public hearing is complete, you may leave if you wish. Okay, the first item on the agenda for tonight is Chris Sunval, Greg and Carrie Johnson, application for a variance to construct a home within the setback of the Mississippi River, located in Zebulon Shores, Little Falls Township. If the applicants would state their names for the record.
Greg Johnson.
My name is Chris Sunval. I'm the owner of the property.
Thank you. And Amy, the staff report.
You bet, Mr. Chair. Again, this is a variance request to construct a dwelling within setback to the river in Section 30 of Little Falls Township. The ordinance section is actually Mississippi Headwaters Board, and it is Section F1, requiring a 150-foot setback from the river. Give me just a moment, I'm having computers. There we go. Here's a plat map of Little Falls Township, and the red dot is the location of the parcel. And then here's the variance request received from the applicant. And then a site drawing provided by the applicant. And then here's an aerial photograph of the parcel. And then some oblique imagery of the site. And here's some site photographs taken at the viewing on the 26th of August. Again, the property is in Section 30 of Little Falls Township. It is on the Mississippi River and within the Zebulon Shores subdivision, which was established in 1977. It is a non-conforming single lot, which means it's less than 5 acres and 330 feet wide. The property is 120 feet wide and 25,155 square feet. The applicant, Mr. Johnson, would like to purchase the property from Sunval. The first Mississippi Headwaters Board standards went into effect in 1981. The required setback from the river is 150 feet. The shore impact zone is the first 100 feet from the river. The zoning history of the property includes, in 1993, a variance to separate a contiguous lot, which does not meet the minimum dimensional standards, and to erect a home at 102 feet from the ordinary high water mark of the Mississippi River was granted. In 1995, Minnesota legislative change regarding undersized contiguous lots to be conveyed together. There was a letter to the property owner with a legal opinion that the variance was still valid to separate the lots. The lots were separated, and I wasn't finding exact record of when that was done. In 1995 also, the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance amendment language was done, and that required if within 2 years after the date the variance was granted, a land use permit was not obtained, the variance shall become null and void. And then in 2022, we had an inquiry into developing the lot utilizing the variance granted in 1993 to encroach on the setback from the river. And we did request a county attorney opinion at that time. And that copy of that opinion was in your packet. The applicant is requesting to construct a dwelling 120 feet from the Mississippi River, which is a 30-foot encroachment into the required setback. The location of the septic system was not identified within the variance application, so it is assumed that it will meet all setbacks. An approximate 4,260 square foot building envelope exists on the property. And then here is a site drawing of that. The impervious surface with the proposed development is 16.41%. 25% impervious surface is allowed. The neighborhood consists of many non-conforming structures. Many have been granted variances in the past. And then here is just a neighborhood photo or aerial of that subdivision and the measurements from the river of all of the homes along there. The current owner submitted comments with the application, which were also provided to you in your packet. The applicable comprehensive land use plan goals is natural resources and open spaces, goal C2, shoreline development, goal D1. The applicable Morrison County comprehensive water plan goals and objectives is the surface water goal, objective B, the land use and development goal, objectives B and D. 104 notices were sent. 4 comments were received prior to the hearing. I will read those. We did receive a phone call from Jim Maslowski, and he stated he is okay with the request. We received comment from Mark Anderson, the area hydrologist for the DNR. He said, during the development review team meeting, I was quite clear that the house should be located as far from the Mississippi River as possible, and if a variance were to be requested, that it be focused on the road right-of-way setback requirement instead of the Mississippi River. The application does not address Minnesota DNR concerns or comments. In the practical difficulty, the applicant states, the practical difficulty is that variances were approved in the past. The Board of Adjustment is required to review and make decisions on variance applications with a different process than what was required back in the 1990s. Simply put, a home can be constructed with meeting setbacks or a reduction on the roadside and should be held to that standard. Additionally, the applicant states they are not able to fit their current plans on this lot. Personal design choice is not part of the practical difficulty consideration. If the lot does not meet the applicant's desire for building without a variance, then this lot does not meet their needs, and to create a nonconformity is contrary to the Morrison County Land Use Control Ordinance. The next comment is from Shannon Wetstein, the district manager for the Morrison County Soil and Water Conservation District. She states, having attended the development review team meeting where this project was proposed, my comments have not changed. The recommendation is that at the meeting was for the landowners to request a variance from the road right-of-way instead of the setback from the Mississippi, as increased development within the first 150 feet of a waterway puts avoidable pressure on the slope of the bank, as well as decreases the space available for water infiltration before overland runoff reaches the river. We have witnessed countless shorelines with soils identical to this one, which have erosion issues, or in extreme cases sloughed into the river when impervious surfaces are concentrated within the sensitive area and are allowed to exist. As the applicant has chosen to still pursue the variance despite the recommendation from this office, I have to strongly recommend that the variance be denied, as alternative options do exist on the property. Okay, and then I have a comment from Tim Terrell, the director of the Mississippi Headwaters Board. I have some comments regarding the variance for the Chris Sunval, Greg, and Carrie Johnson variance. Since this is a lot which doesn't have a house built on it, I hope to set a precedence with my comments. I suggest the Board of Adjustment require a setback of 150 feet from the Mississippi River. In doing some rough measuring on the Morrison County Interactive Mapping website, this would allow the home to meet a 36-foot setback from the road as well, and still allowing 71 feet building envelope for the home and garage to be built within. These are my comments. And that is all I have for comments received prior to the hearing, Mr. Chair. And then here you're finding of fact and decision questions.
Thank you. This time, do the applicants have anything to add, clarify, explain?
You know, you saw in my history and obviously in your packet that I have quite a few variances. For personal reasons, I had decided to sell the lot in 1993. I did. We came before your board for a variance. I was sent to the headwaters. Then this headwaters sent me back to the planning and zoning here in Morrison County. So because of the long process, I lost my buyer. They backed out. So that is why I never pulled a permit, and that's why, you know, I have the variances. The lot was separated, so I could sell it because the attorney up at the headwaters indicated to their board that if they didn't grant me the variances that I was asking for, in his opinion, now this was the attorney for the headwaters, that he could see legal action, since this was an asset that I owned, and that they were denying me use of my asset. So I wasn't able to pull a permit because my buyers backed out. I've owned the lot for 31 years. I paid taxes on it. I've kept it mowed so my neighborhood looked nice. I guess all we're asking for is equal treatment to that subdivision, because if you look, most of those houses are set back extremely less than 100 feet, some of them 70, some 80, most of them 90. And, you know, I think the Johnsons are asking for something reasonable. They're gonna build something very nice. They're very respected people that are coming to our community. They're educated, they're professional, and let's face it, I don't feel, and I don't think the Johnsons are gonna screw up Minnesota's natural resources. I mean, they value them just like I do. So, I mean, my comments are, you know, I've been granted variances in the past. I was not aware that they expired. So when I sold the lot, my purchase agreement, I thought I had variances in place that there wouldn't be any problems. So that's what I have to say. So.
Thank you.
Just a few comments. I'd like to note that while I respect the comments from the people that shared their thoughts today, I do recognize that there is a building envelope on the property. But when you look at the picture of the building envelope on the property and you consider the neighborhood, the existing properties, and I think what is a reasonable proposal for construction, I would hope that the county would recognize that. I would say it's not a big ask. I understand we have rules and variances and setbacks in place, but we're asking for 25 to 30 feet to be able to construct a home and hopefully pay taxes in this school district and county.
Thank you. All right, questions? Staff? Not many staff here. Or for the applicants?
Amy, do you know if, I know I talked to Shannon today about this. Do you know if Mark Anderson was ever viewed the property?
On the ground?
Yes.
I'm not aware that he viewed, but he didn't share that with me.
Yeah, I know that.
He was present at the development review team meeting and has
I-
seen the
I
packet.
understand. Yeah, no, so, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Mr. Chair, I wanted to make comment that I did view the property on the 24th, and I believe you guys did on the 26th. Then here, another thought, as we've been hearing, if you could possibly move that closer to the road, you know, it wouldn't be infringing as much. If you've given that any thought, what are your feelings on that?
I think that, I wish my wife was here tonight to speak more passionately about the lot and the home, but I know we're requesting 120 feet. I think we'd be open to 130 feet setback, but I don't think we would be interested in that lot if we were being held to anything more than that. 140, 150 would just, and I know it's our house design and there is an envelope, but that's what we'd like to do on that property.
130 is easier to digest, in my opinion. Other board members have other thoughts on it, I'm sure. And it's a beautiful lot, and it looks like there's plenty area to place a home in there. One thing I wanted to make comment was there's a lot of growth trees and shrubs on the hillside to prevent erosion, which I'd like to see that. And here, what are your plans to access the river?
We haven't talked a lot about that, but I would suspect that we would like to be able to have access to the river. I know that one of the people that were there talked about a good buffer and vegetation that's there. So our plans would be to limit and not disrupt it. Try to have a minimal impact on that bank. It's a steep bank.
Yep, I appreciate that. And another comment I wanted to reiterate, you were talking about good stewards, and you may be very good stewards, but we're held that that variance goes to the property, to the land, and you're not going to be around here forever, as I'm not, or others to it. Just wanted to reiterate that portion of
And
it.
I want to say, again, I didn't know that they were null and void, and again, the variances you're saying, again, and I heard this from somebody else, that the variances go to the property. Okay, well, that's why I thought I had my variances in place, because they were on the property, not to me. So I just want to say that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead.
maybe a question for Amy. We've had some discussion here about 130-foot setback as opposed to 120, but that would push the 66 feet back on the road. Would that change this request?
Yes, Mr. Chair, since the request to encroach on the setback from the road right-of-way was not part of this, we would need to renotice this and rehear it because it wasn't a part. And then, of course, I'm sure the township would have, would and should be given the opportunity to comment on encroachment on the setback from their right-of-way.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
so what is the setback on the right of way on this one?
On this one, it would be 30 feet from their right-of-way is what the required setback is.
Okay, but if they're 66,
Well, that's 66 feet from the center line of the drawing. I'm not sure what
oh, right
the
here it
township,
says 30, no, that's their
not sure what the
building
township claims for a right-of-way, but in your packet, you can see with our right-of-way layer on
Yeah.
what that approximate measurement would be.
envelope.
Thank you. Perhaps the applicant could clarify that comment you made about moving from 120 to 130. Would you modify your plan, your building plan, so you'd meet the road setback?
I would suspect we'd be able to do that.
Okay, that's what you were proposing rather than, okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
You're welcome.
Okay, anybody else?
I just got one comment, is that from what I was able to gather, was that none of the three comments, the letters from the Mississippi Headwaters or Mark or Shannon, which I respect all of them, and I respect everybody. I'd like to have you consider that, you know, when we read here, the relief from the strictest interpretation, and what I gathered was this, enforcing this was an opportunity to reinforce the rules more than, none of them ever viewed the property. You know, in looking at the property, the way it drains away from the river, is that I think it should be, you know, that's my thought, is that that with conditions with a buffer, I think that this could work. I think it should be considered.
Thank
So,
you.
But, you know, I respect my fellow board members as well, so.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any other input? Should we see if there's public comment? Okay, we're open for public comment. Same rules as in meeting number 1.
George Sandy, Little Falls Township. I guess looking at this thing, and I know the lot, I guess, and Chuck lives right across the street from it. I think the township may be open to maybe find some middle ground to maybe encroach on the, closer to the road right away. So there's an opportunity there, I think, to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Myron Check, Pike Creek Township. Here kind of by default, I came for the first part of the meeting, but I actually was one of the 104 people invited for this one as well. I live across the river in Pike Creek Township, but it is within the half mile. I took the opportunity to view the property, and I looked at it on Beacon pretty intensely just to see what my opinion would be. My first thought was that the people that live on either side, or for sure in Zebulon Shores, should be the opinions that matter. And being I really haven't heard from any, I'll just put myself in that position. And if I lived on either side of that house, I would much prefer to have the location of the house that they have planned. Rather than move that house way up by the road, it just wouldn't seem to make sense to me. The whole Zebulon Shores has been developed the way it is, and to throw one house right on the road would be, in my opinion, if I was a neighbor, it wouldn't be what I would want to see. So that's my 2 cents worth. I would be in favor of the variance, the way they're requesting it.
Thank you.
Excuse me, good evening. I'm Glenn West. My wife Patricia and I live at 11993 Zebulon Shores Drive. We are the adjacent property owners to the north of the property that's requested the variance. We strongly support the approval of the requested variance and feel that approval would enable the Johnsons to become a strong addition to the neighborhood, township, and county. I think I agree with Mr. Check that if you're forcing back 150 feet, it's going to throw the balance out of the rest of the neighborhood to tie in with the existing homes and stuff. So I strongly support approval.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Chuck Perrins, Little Falls Township, but I also am a resident a couple doors down. You know, it's nice to see the river, but, you know, the reality is that these, in retrospect, are, you know, they're pieces of property that have, across time, need to get some sort of use, or, you know, they might as well be designated a park at some point, and that gives no relief to Mrs. Sunball. So, you know, I think, in also keeping with Mr. West, I'm glad he was here today as well. I think when you look at sort of these grandfathered environments, it's nice to look at the alignment of all the houses, and they are really pretty much aligned much closer to the river. I don't know that we have to choose the most minimal distance, and even the most maximum is still, you know, closer than what we're advocating here for. The variance is not excessive, and the other piece of it is, though, I think it's critical to really get down to measurements, you know, make sure it's been surveyed, and so we got some accurate descriptions of where these, you know, each piece of the plan needs to be, and I don't think we see that here yet. So from a township perspective, it'd be nice to get a little more detail and clarity on where everything is going to be. And we didn't discuss the plan must be a 2-story house. Is that accurate? So, you know, I think that, you know, the elevation, just knowing that there's going to be an elevation is important. But having the 2 septic drain fields, the well, the tank, and all those things identified down to basically inches would be nice. I know that isn't entire reality, but I think it would be good to give that kind of resolution to the plan and make that part of the recommendation and the approval, just so that everybody's confident that all those things fall into place and they are where they're supposed to be. Because the road may not necessarily be on the right center line for all we know. And then the application, I'm assuming, would also need to be a variance asking for 7, well, unless he reduces the size of the house, which I don't necessarily, we're not advocating for that necessarily, but the encroachment on the road right away, if that were the case, needs to be clarified a little bit better. But I think we're fully in favor. We like tax base. So, you know, it kind of finishes up the neighborhood. It's the last remaining lot that has to be developed, and I'd love to see it become that way and add to the community and all those other things that have been discussed here a little bit before. But I personally want to see that there are certain gates that need to be gone through here to just see and be able to visualize exactly what we're talking about here, because it's not quite the resolution I'd like to see. But thank you very much. I would strongly advise, approval of some variation on this, so thank you.
Thank you.
Jeff Johnson. I am a resident of Morrison County. I live on the Mississippi River south of this. The only comment I want to make is I agree that resolution is nice, but the problem you have is resolution costs money. And having everything surveyed, getting everything done, someone's got to pay for that. And if you don't know if you can build on the property, I understand what you're asking for, Chuck, but for someone to outlay thousands of dollars to get everything down to the inch and then come back and it gets denied, it's, at some point we have to assume that things are going to meet the setbacks.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment?
Len McCarthy, Little Falls. I lived next to that property for 18 years, and I know that I understand you have to watch for the water and where it runs and so forth, but to have them build right on the road will throw that balance off in that neighborhood. And the other side of it is, I would think you'd rather have a tax base on a multi-$100,000 home than on a $90,000 lot.
Thank you. Any other public input? I'll ask 2 more times, and then we'll close the public input. Any other input? Any other public input? If not, we'll close that part of the meeting. Okay, gentlemen.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, go ahead, Marv.
I would like Amy, if possible, to bring that building envelope up and for all to see something. I'm thinking you've seen something here, but just alignment in the neighborhood. Okay, so if you look at that marking 150 feet, he was willing to drop that to 130 feet. And if you look at the northern building portion of that, the neighboring home there, I'm imagining it's like 28 feet wide. And where that would bring that, it would bring that in alignment with both of them. It would actually be a little bit closer to the river than it is, if I'm seeing that correctly.
Are you asking me a question?
Well, I'm just commenting on this here, saying that, and he was willing to do that. And I think a lot of what's up here is give and take. And we seeing this here in the comments we've heard from others, I wanted others to see this.
Mr. Chair?
Just 1 second. Amy, did you were responding to that?
Not really. I'm not really quite following what you just said, but
Yeah, I'm thinking, before we get to you, Brent, what Chuck mentioned was a survey and, getting everything staked out so you know exactly where it is. I think that is a good idea. And if this were to go so far as to be granted, variance granted, I think that would be a condition, that before anything started, that you knew where, knew where the setbacks were and knew that you could meet those, that someday you weren't,
Mr. Chair?
non-conforming on other things. Yes.
That would get shaken out as part of the permit process, because we're gonna verify setbacks. And we're gonna work off the ordinary high water mark of the river in order to verify that those setbacks are met. So I don't know, and the expectation then would be that if a variance is granted for encroachment, that's where it's going to be, and we're gonna be checking that. So, I think we have resources within our office to be able to identify whether or not, for example, they're not asking for a variance for the septic, so that septic is expected to meet all setbacks. If it won't, once the designer comes out there and it won't, they may be coming back here for a variance. Otherwise, they're gonna be proposing something that can be permitted, and we would be verifying those setbacks.
In the side yard and the right-of-way, you're
Side yard, it'd be expected that
confident.
they know where their side property line is. It is platted, so there should be some stake or some corner irons there, and we would work off of
You would
those.
verify that. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Did that help?
Well, I understood that portion of it, and what I wanted to bring this up, we're talking about how it would fit in the neighborhood and pulling it closer to the road where that red marking is, the building envelope, it would look kind of odd there. I'm not going to disagree with that. And how the neighbors didn't like that, they didn't like it. If we granted this variance, and was originally asking for a 120-foot setback from the river, he was willing to drop it to 130 feet. If you look where the 150 feet, you move in to that 130, it comes in alignment with the neighboring homes.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Brent.
I think along those lines, we kind of went down this. If that is the request, it'll have to be amended. Isn't that right, Amy?
If by being, instead of 120 feet from the river, being 130 feet from the river, if that's gonna slide back and encroach on the setback from the road, yes, that would have to be re-advertised.
And then the township could weigh in on that.
Exactly.
And understanding, even if this variance is granted by the county, you still have to take it, and it goes forward to the Mississippi Headwaters.
That's correct.
And we have a letter from Mississippi Headwaters recommending that it be at
We
150.
don't have one from them.
Yes, from the director,
Yes.
from
So,
Tim Terrell.
so that is, I'm just talking to the applicant here at this point, Greg, that you may want to think about this at this point. I mean, we can move forward and go forward with this now, and it may or may not be approved, but if it is and it goes forward and they're not going to approve it, then you're coming back before with another plan. So I guess it's a decision at this point. If you want to halt where you're at, take it back and find out some of these things and bring it forward.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Clint.
looking at what we could see without exact measurements, if he moves it to 130, I don't feel would infringe on the road right-of-way setback at all. If he moved it to 140, it'd be tougher, but 130 wouldn't be. If we look at this, it's awful. I totally respect the letters that were sent in, and if you listen, they'd rather have you push towards the right-of-way setback. Okay, he'd have to apply for another variance. By moving it back to 130 versus 120, inevitably, it is putting more pressure on that other side of that house. We're out there, we visited that, we looked at it. Majority of the water is gonna run away from the river. I'm a stick, I don't think we should build anything in the shore impact zone. it'd be 30 feet out of the shore impact zone. Yes, it don't meet the 150-foot setback, but you look on the map, figure 5, originally he's asking for 121. If we could push him to 130, he's still 40 feet farther than the next farthest one.
Exactly. And it's, excuse me, gentlemen, but, and I
Go
hate,
ahead. Just hold on a second.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Clint.
So, and I'm not saying, wrong is wrong, but how can we deny the last lot in the whole deal that's gonna be the farthest one away from the river, that the water slopes away from the river? I think that's reasonable, so it's just comments, it's just my comments and what I'm thinking here. We still gotta come up with a practical difficulty, we still gotta go through all the questions, but it's just a thought.
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Amy.
can I ask the applicant a question? If your proposed home, I know you've got this design choice here. If you were going to go 130 feet back from the river rather than 120, would that require an encroachment on the setback from the road right of way?
I don't think we'd go that route. We would adjust our plans.
Okay, so you would do a little bit of a redesign of the house.
Correct.
Meet the setback from the road right of way and then
Correct.
be 10 feet farther than what you're proposing here in your application right now?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
So,
Okay.
so
Hold on just a second. I was just thinking, I think we're kind of splitting hairs on this 10 feet here, 10 feet there. I think what it really comes down to is, do we want to create a non-conforming structure or not? Do we want to, grant this variance? And are there conditions that we can put on it that, mitigate the concerns that have been brought forward by, the 3 very learned letters, that came our way? And I agree with the public comments. How does it fit in the neighborhood? We've got that question to answer. And if it's pushed way closer to the road, even 10 feet closer to the road, it's a kind of a big deal in this. So I don't know. I'm for considering it just as he's brought it forward and conditioning it if necessary. We've got to find a practical difficulty. I'm not sure how we're going to do that. We've got bigger fish to fry. Brent, you had a thought.
well, my question is we're looking at 130 feet as proposed. Greg would have to amend that to 120 if he wanted to.
No, 130 and amend to 130.
It is proposed at 120.
To be 120 feet from the river. And I think what's on the table is discussion to be 130 feet from the river.
And he would have to amend that then, would he not?
You could condition it, that it be no closer.
Yep.
And then he could amend his plans accordingly to make fit.
Correct.
You mean right now or at a later date? Or both?
Right.
Essentially, what you'd be doing is granting a variance to place a dwelling 130 feet from the river. Whatever that looks like would be on the applicant to come with a design that would fit that. And then we would field check it.
So a condition would be that it not be any closer than 130 feet.
That's correct.
From the Mississippi headwaters.
Correct.
Okay. Any other, well, go ahead. Mr.
Okay.
Chairman.
Yeah, thanks. All right. Any other discussion? So I think we should move forward, considering his request as he has it presented in front of us today. Does anybody else think otherwise? Is that your wish?
Listening to your discussion, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Stish. I would obviously prefer it to be at 120, could live with 130. If I know that I have the support of you folks, I want to leave it where it's at, but if you're going to turn it down, I'll settle for 130. I don't know if that makes any sense, but I'm just trying to read the room.
What I was going to say is it's,
I think that makes sense. Does that make sense to you? If we move forward with the 120 request and see where it takes us?
Mr. Chair, what I'm thinking is when we have all these letters, recommendations of, about moving closer to the road and how their feelings are on that, if he was willing to move it slightly and it would pacify them too, that's why I made that recommendation is then if we do approve this, then they would understand part of it. And that's what their recommendation is, to move it as close as possible to the road without having to go through that permitting process and it fitting in there. That's my reasoning behind my request.
Yeah, again, my thoughts are anything less than 150 feet is a non-conforming structure. That's what we're talking about here, a non-conforming structure and a practical difficulty. So I think it's splitting hairs, whether it's 120, 130, 140, 110. Yeah. But I think perhaps we should answer the question with those things in mind and answer your question accordingly, if that's okay. Confusing maybe, but hopefully not. I guess we're ready to review the criteria questions.
Mr. Chairman, so are you ruling out?
I'm not ruling out anything, I'm suggesting.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So the request before us is what we have on the application here. Okay. Is the request in harmony with the general purposes and intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance and Comprehensive Plan? I'm just going to ask for a volunteer to start out first, and that'll be our theme for the night.
I can start, Mr.
Okay,
Chair.
we'll start with Clint.
There's a process, they can apply for a variance, so that's in harmony with, our intent and our ordinances. And with the variance, there's gotta be a diversion of some of the setbacks and some of the rules. It's 150-foot setback. They come for a variance to ease that by 30 feet, so that'd be 120. I think, looking at this, they're allowed to do that and build a house and come for this process. So if going through this process, that is in harmony if it would get through.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then we go to Dave, or whoever else wants to comment.
I agree with Clint, is that the general purposes and intent, it's quite broad ranging. It isn't just narrowed down to one specific criteria here. And so this request is in harmony with the general intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinance.
Okay. We'll go in order. Marv?
Mr. Chair, the way I view this here too, with their willingness to possibly move it further away, helps me to digest it. But also wanted to make comment, and I know it's null and void. A variance once was granted. This process already went through, but it's null and void. But with them going through their steps, they allowed it also.
Okay. And Brent?
Nothing further.
Okay. I wrestle with this thing. I go here and there. Where do I want to land? I'm not sure. I appreciate public comment. It helped. I appreciate all your input here on the board too. It's not the purpose and intent of the land use ordinance to create nonconformities. It's the purpose is to respect setbacks whenever possible, unless there's a practical difficulty. The only practical difficulty here is the proposed design and how it fits the property. It doesn't fit without decreasing the setback to the Mississippi River. But given that, it's still out of the shore impact zone. And for the record, we did, as Marv stated, we did have a site visit on Friday. Marv was there 2 days prior to that. So all of us have visited the site. And there is a very good buffer along the shoreline, a very good, I mean, that bank is stable, as stable as any bank on the Mississippi, especially that steep a bank. And I think with a condition like protecting that cover and maybe only granting whatever over-the-counter access to the river is with the 4-foot stairway and whatever, whatever is permitted over the counter would protect that and be in harmony. I think also that that screen that is there, more screen than any of the neighbors have, for sure, more trees, would be in harmony with the purposes of Mississippi Headwaters Board and Morrison County Land Use Ordinance, that, we preserve natural spaces, that we preserve that, the Mississippi corridor, that it, the new, in 1980 or 81, 5 acres became the minimum lot, for new lots. Along comes our Board of Adjustment at the time and disregards that and creates a non-conforming lot, which brings us here today. That's what non-conformities do to you. They bring you back to this table time and time again. I don't know if you probably well, you know that very well. You have a non-conforming house. You've had anything you do, you can't hardly sneeze without a variance. The same thing will be true for you if you were granted your variance. It's kind of a conundrum. Is there a covenants for Zebulon Shores?
There is.
And could you share what that is?
I don't exactly have, I haven't read it in a long time, but I know that it has to be a house. You can't put a manufactured home there. There's fences, you can't have fences between the lots. Some people have put up hedges as a fence, but it's very open and it's a beautiful subdivision. I'm glad I was able to raise my children there because it was wonderful.
And the covenants is, maybe Chuck, you can lend some light on that?
Yes, Mr. Chair. There are no covenants that I know of. There was a Zebulon architectural. There are a lot of covenants. Check your abstract.
I'm losing control.
Dale
Chuck
Peterson
first.
has covenants.
Mr. Parsons first, please. He's the only one that has the floor.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'll go back and check, but all I knew about was there was a Zebulon Architectural Control Committee. It was the developer and some other associated people. They did have what would be purported to be covenants, but I don't remember them being on the deed, Mr. West.
Yeah, those are usually,
So,
Thank you for clarifying
but
that.
otherwise, the fences are all the county's being permitted process.
Sure.
Mr. Chair?
Okay, go ahead. Amy?
It's a little, this is probably outside the scope of what we need to consider for this variance anyway, but covenants generally are valid for 30 years and then unless they're renewed by
I
the HOA. So,
I thought there might be some covenants in place that would help direct the flow of our thinking here.
I do have them here, sir. And
But-
it's no trailers, no portable, no mobile structures, no basement, home or tent or garage without structures, no livestock.
Okay,
So,
what's common?
yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, with that given, that's my comments on question number 1. Board of Adjustment put us in a difficult position here back in 1993. By granting variances, we create nonconformities and continue the confusion. And there is a building envelope. So, any other comments on question number 1? Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? We'll start out with you, Dave.
Yes, they are. That land use ordinance says they have to be 150 feet from the river, and in order to build anything that fits in the neighborhood, you know, what the house that they're proposing is using their property in a reasonable manner. And I think that I had some discussions with attorneys about land use too as well, and what you talked about, the attorney for the Mississippi Headwaters. And there are precedents for land use. And this is definitely a reasonable use of that property.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Mr. Chair,
Go ahead, Marv.
I wanted to point out something else. As you pointed out, there is a building envelope. We see how narrow it is, and it would look pretty strange if they would just use that building area and fit something in that. And what it would do is devaluate neighborhood properties, just like a trailer park out in nice homes. Just maybe stretching it by that, but if you're doing that, and how else could you use this parcel? It's a nice, beautiful lot. What makes sense? And what he's proposing, I think, makes sense. Could he make it a little smaller? Probably. And that's why I said if we drop down a little bit, it may fit better. But yeah, we don't want to devaluate the property, neighboring properties, their properties, what fits.
Okay, thank you, Marv. Anybody else? Okay, number 3, will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? And we're starting there with you, Marv.
Absolutely. The neighbors all commented about how this nice home, what he's proposing building, how it'll fit in and blend in with the rest of the homes. And the neighboring homes, as you see, are 80-some feet, 70-some feet from the river. This is 120 he's proposing, and it still fits in there very well. So, yeah, it does fit in it quite well.
Anybody else?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chair.
Clint?
Yeah, you know, Marv commented a little bit earlier about the placement of the home. It would line up with the other homes in there. So then that gives you, you know, maintains the essential character. And then yet, if it still is lined up with them other homes, it's still the farthest one away from the water. So I just wanted to say that comment.
The only thing I'd like to add to that, and normally this is a negative comment, but in this case, it's not. The essential character of the neighborhood is overdeveloped, undersized, non-conforming lots. And it kind of works for Zebulon Shores. That's what it was created to be. I hate to say it is what it is, huh? Anybody else on essential character? Number 4, is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Brent, you get to start this one out.
I'll try. You know, where it's located, how it was split, when it was split, being the shoreland of the Mississippi, having the Mississippi headwaters weighing in on this, trying to fit a sewer, a well, a driveway entrance, all that compression into the lot that is now created. I think that if we're looking for a practical difficulty, that's the practical difficulty that I see, is how do you fit all of this into that compressed area? I don't know what other practical difficulty there is other than trying to fit all of what's proposed into a compressed envelope.
Okay. Anybody like to add to that? Yeah, I hate to say this, but we can't the building proposal can't be the practical difficulty. It's got to be some unique feature on the property. Not the design, not the wishes of the previous landowner or the future landowner, but it's got to be the land. It's all about the land.
Well, and that's where I said how it's split, when it was split, the land. I think that's part of that.
You know, a stretch would be too, for practical difficulty is, if you go with the building envelope, you're gonna be the odd duck of the whole neighborhood. You know, I don't know how that's a practical difficulty, but you're gonna be the one that's way out of sorts. The way everything's designed in that, it ain't a subdivision, but, you know, Zebulon Shores is just the way it's all designed there. I don't know, the original, which we can't go by original stuff, but you look back in the 93 or whatever, that was for 102 feet. You know, but,
Well, kind of what you're saying is if we enforce the building envelope, then we no longer can answer number 3 or possibly even number 2 positively. I mean, then we'd have to say we're forcing it not to fit the essential character of the neighborhood.
Good logic.
I hate logic sometimes.
No, really?
I like rules. I like rules, especially when they're followed and everything fits in a nice little container. Anything else on the practical difficulty? Number 5. Oh my gosh, I got to start this one. Is the need for the practical or the variance created by actions other than the landowner or prior landowners or former Board of Adjustments? That's not in there, though. Both the landowner and the proposed landowner are obviously the reason we're here today, because of the variance that was requested years ago by the present landowner and by the proposed structure of the possible future landowner. Hard to get away from that. But we can add others to the list. I challenge you to do that, guys. Actions other than just the landowner or prior landowners.
Mr. Chair, something as the rules and regulations had changed on the Headwaters Board to create this issue. That's what I believe could be used as that.
and Mr. Chair,
Yes.
could also use what I kind of put in for the practical difficulty of the pressure of the neighborhood, the way the whole neighborhood's designed. You know, you could put that down for that, the pressure of that would,
Yeah, the essential character. Okay, anything else on number 5? Okay, number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Clint?
oh, yes, you know, he's not looking to get anything cheaper or more money. It's just to get it to fit. You know, he's willing to compromise a little bit, the way it sounded. He's still proposing to be out of the shore impact zone, but yet do minimal damage to the shoreline. If it was all about economics, you know, he'd be closer to the road because he'd want to pay as much for a driveway, right? Or he'd wipe out all the trees and everything going down to the river frontage. So I think there is more than just economics.
Anybody want to add to that? Yeah, yeah, me either. Reviewing all of these questions, we obviously did find some negatives. To offset those negatives, I would, at least some of the negatives, I'm not saying enough of them to vote yes, possibly, but some of the negatives would be a stormwater plan. Whenever you get too close to the river, don't meet a setback, stormwater is a concern. That was the main issue in both of the, or all of the letters of concern. A stormwater plan would make sure water collects and absorbs into the ground as much as possible and does not flow towards the river. So I would say that would be one condition I think we should impose in considering our answers. And that would be a stormwater plan acceptable to Morrison County Land Services.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
I think that's a good idea, having that looked at, because that lot is kind of a bowl, where you don't have any culverts out towards the road, so there's really, where is it going to go? And it's going to sit there, and you're going to potentially have, a structure there. And it's uphill on both directions, so it isn't like you can put culverts in and shed it somewhere other than the other side of the road. So understanding that probably is a good idea.
And we don't want to shed water on neighbors' property, that's a no-no.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Would it be appropriate, I saw to ask the town, where does the water go? George, where does it?
Coarse soil. Very coarse.
Almost sugar sand.
It's sand. It's like beach sand.
You will never have standing water there. There's nowhere for the water to go. There's no road ditches there, it's flat off the road.
Okay, well, thank you.
Okay,
So that's
yeah, thank you. Of course, construction does change that a bit, compaction of soil and addition of other things. So I think a stormwater plan would still be, a good idea.
Arguing about
Yeah.
that. I just think-
No, that was a good question. Then I'm also thinking another thing would be, at least I had discussed with the applicant, no development on that shoreline other than access to the river with over-the-counter permittable stairway, or whatever is permittable over the counter. Okay. Should we move forward and voting on these questions with those two conditions in mind? Is everybody okay with that?
The two conditions was a stormwater, what was the other condition?
No development of that shoreline other than access to the water with whatever is permitted over the counter.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, that would mean that.
So, Mr. Chair, also with that condition, I had asked if possible to move it to 130. I know we're splitting hairs, but by that, NEV still can meet the road right away and stuff that would fit with the neighboring, and it would show that we're still respecting the other individuals with their letters.
Okay. Is that how everybody wants to move forward? You're talking 130 feet?
Correct.
I have another question, may I?
Yeah, go ahead.
May I? No,
Here,
I have
pull
no
this up,
problem.
Dave.
What you just proposed makes sense.
Closer to the microphone.
What you propose makes sense, Marv. I have no issue with that. How do you, when you talk about, I like that buffer there. I like that buffer there. How do you make certain that that brush stays there? I mean, that's wonderful shoreland stabilization stuff and still get access to the river. How do you
Mr. Chair?
go?
Yeah, maybe you should ask Amy, is that the condition, the way I proposed it, enforceable?
Yes, Mr. Chair, what we would do is the condition would be that no disturbance of the bank or of the shoreline other than the permittable 4 feet wide set of stairs that go down, and the vegetative clearing that would be associated with that. So it just depends on how you write that condition. So they would still have access down to the water, but it wouldn't be anything else other than that, and no other vegetative removal could occur.
Mr. Chair?
That's what I intended. Go ahead, Brent.
To address Dave's point, he's talking about the mature trees that are
And then also
in the bank. Maybe a condition of absent the walkway down, that no removal of any mature trees would occur. And I think they're far enough out of the building envelope, and the area where you're talking about proposing to build should be acceptable there, that there'd be no mature trees. I think everybody would appreciate that.
It's already covered, I think.
Along with not disturbing any vegetation along
Correct.
the shoreline.
Other than what's permitted for the walkway.
Yeah, okay.
Trying to address some of the issues of the Mississippi headwaters there too.
Okay. Well, if you make it really brief, stand up, you're gonna have to state your name.
Jeff Johnson, does the headwaters already have a policy of what can be cleared and can't be cleared on the shoreline?
They do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So, double reinforcement.
Can we vote?
Yeah, can we please?
We can vote if you're ready. Okay? Okay, and is the request in harmony with the general purposes intent of the Morrison County Land Use Ordinances and Comprehensive Plan? Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
And myself is yes, with the conditions. Number 2, is the applicant proposing to use the property in a reasonable manner not permitted by the land use ordinance? Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes, and Clint?
Yes, with the conditions.
Okay. Will the issuance of the variance maintain the essential character of the locality? Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes, Clint?
Yes.
And Dave?
Yes.
Is the alleged practical difficulty due to circumstances unique to the property? Brent?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
And Marv?
Yes.
Is the need for the variance created by actions other than the landowners or prior landowners? Myself is yes. Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
And Brent?
Yes.
Number 6, does the alleged practical difficulty involve more than just economic considerations? Clint?
Yes.
Dave?
Yes.
Marv?
Yes.
Brent?
Yes.
Myself? Not really, but yes. So all of the questions have been answered to the affirmative. Is there a motion with 2 conditions attached?
I move.
Mr. Chair, I would like to correct you. There was
Oh,
more
3
than 2 conditions. There were like 3 or 4 conditions. If Amy, okay, Amy, would you read them, please?
Okay, thank you.
Yep, the property owner, prior to permitting, submit a stormwater plan acceptable to land services. Access, no development of the shoreline other than access to the river and disturbance associated with that as permitted, and no removal of mature trees.
And it was 130 feet in there?
I didn't hear the 130 feet.
Is that, okay?
One of the conditions we
Okay.
put.
Voted on?
That's what I voted on.
And dwelling shall be no closer than 130 feet.
I'd like to make that a motion to approve that, them conditions.
I second that motion.
Okay, motion is made and seconded with, are we calling that 4 conditions?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Is there any discussion on the motion? There's no discussion, we'll proceed to vote. Clint?
Aye.
Dave?
Aye.
Marv?
Aye.
Brent?
Aye.
And myself is aye. Motion carries.
Okay, so this the findings of fact and the decision will go to the Mississippi Headwaters Board, and they have to certify the decision. So they'll review all of this at their next meeting, and then if they certify it, they have the ability to certify this, change it, or reverse it. And so once that is known, then we'll know the full outcome of the variance request tonight.
One more time, certify, change, or,
They can certify, change, or reverse.
thank you.
So Amy, we have to wait until the end of September, till their meeting to find out if variance is okay?
That's correct. They have to certify that,
You know,
yes.
there is we live in Minnesota, and
You can take this discussion to Land Services after the
thank
meeting.
you very much.
But thank you for your input.
No, you
Where am I
didn't.
at now? I
You
can't
didn't know what
remember.
it was.
Next, minutes from the last meeting.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve.
Okay. I second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, sounds like all ayes. Is there any new business?
No, Mr. Chair.
Old business?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I'd like to thank everybody for staying and for all of your input. It was very helpful. Thanks for participating in local government.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion is
Second
made.
that.
Second to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned, 9:58.